what if your diet is already pretty good? What if you're thinking, or maybe you're thinking, I already have green smoothies. I already eat mostly healthy. Is there another thing you can do to level up easily, to level up your health through nutrition? And I think there is, and it would be time restricted feeding, or also intermittent fasting. It's basically the same thing, right? And time restricted feeding is so. In terms of health benefits, there's a lot to be said about it. But I would say that there are a couple of things that are really worthwhile about it. The first is, there was a very interesting study done on a large group of nurses. Nurses are often recruited for studies, where they looked at the feeding window, which is basically what is the time between the first calorie ingested and the last calorie ingested in the day. And they noticed, and this was a long-term study, and they noticed that the difference between whether the feeding window was 12 hours, was more than 12 hours or less than 12 hours, was dramatic for health outcomes. So, in other words, people who have a fasting window, so a period of time where they don't eat, that is shorter than 12 hours, shorter than half the day, that basically means that predictably they get various diseases sooner and more often, and they die sooner. And it's a really dramatic result compared to people. So literally someone who has 12 hours of fasting versus someone who has like 10 hours of fasting. Huge dramatic difference in health outcomes, huge. And in part, it's probably because of the circadian rhythm. So food is a signal for the circadian rhythm. And if you eat for too long of a period during the day, it kind of throws off your circadian rhythm, and it has detrimental kind of domino effect of health problems, right? So that is the one thing that I think everyone can benefit from. Make sure that you have basically at least 13 hours of fasting every day. In other words, if you're eating breakfast at 7 in the morning, then you don't want to be eating dinner at 8 at night, right? You want to make sure that your dinner is earlier or that your breakfast is later. Then another thing is that there's a lot of stuff that happens when we fast that is really good for us. So the body kind of goes into a different mode. It kind of goes into cleanup mode, right? When we fast. And there are lots of benefits of longer term fasts. And it's somewhat debatable of how much benefit there is to something like a 16-hour fast, right? So like eating during 8 hours. So that's like the skip breakfast, right? You skip breakfast means that you eat for 8 hours roughly a day and you fast for 16 hours. I think this is often like there's false advertising around this because people often talk about intermittent fasting and refer to benefits that come from long-term fasting studies. I was like, no. The benefits that someone derived from a 3-day or 7-day fast, you don't get like a small percentage of those benefits in your 16-hour fast, It takes longer for those modes in the body to kick in. So I think that, often I think it's overhyped. It's one of those things, right? Intermittent fasting, everybody's talking about it now. I think it's overhyped. It's probably not as good for you as you've been led to believe if you've kind of read articles about this and stuff like that. But it's almost certainly good for you. And the one thing I would also recommend is like just pay attention to how you feel, because I've experimented with this a lot. When do I start eating? When do I stop eating in the day? And something that for example, I recently read some studies that really indicate that probably having breakfast and skipping dinner would be better than skipping breakfast and having dinner. And I really tried to make this work. But it just doesn't work for me. So if I just pay attention to like my energy levels and how I feel and how well I sleep and so on, if I try to have breakfast, it just doesn't work. But it's one of those things like, unless I would have experimented with it, unless I would have started experimenting with skipping breakfast, I would have never realized that I actually feel much better when I skip breakfast. So it's the same kind of thing. I would have been like, no, I'm fine. And I'm not realizing that I'm operating at 80%. So that's one thing that, like I say, anyone with any diet, this is something you can implement. Make sure that you have a fasting window of more than 12 hours and try skipping one meal and see how that feels. but basically skip either breakfast or dinner because of the fasting window. You don't want to skip lunch. That makes no sense, basically. And it's also for weight loss. A lot of people notice that basically when you remove one meal from the day, you're no hungrier than usual. You don't feel like you're depriving yourself from anything, but you just eat less, and you're much more likely to, if you're overweight, to go to normal weight with what feels like no effort at all.
Yeah, because you had plenty of people. Well, I've encountered plenty of people who they struggle with late night snacking, and just putting a limit on that, saying to like 8 o'clock or whatever, is I've noticed with some of my clients in the past that just doing that alone would cause them to lose like half a stone of weight or whatever. It didn't even feel really that much like effort.